Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I am back with Mark Livesay. We're going to talk e-scouting today. And today's podcast is going to be about meadows and feeding zones. And this is our first elk finding. That's like my wife when she says, did you catch an elk? No, I killed one with an arrow through the heart. But
maybe I should change my slogan to catching elk.
Catching elk. We're a little early. It's working for catching deers.
It is early this morning, so
it's a little early. But we're gonna dive into that. This is episode 6 of our Art of Finding Elk series, and Mark is running the Treeline Academy, where you can go to take some e-scouting courses. And these are like high-tech, high-quality professional courses you can do online. And in this series, we're just kind of touching at a high level on what's in the course. And hopefully it sparks your interest and you go and get the course because it's that good. You're one of the leading speakers at the Western Hunting Summit that Ryan is putting on, Stealthy Hunter, Hunt, Harvest Health. And you're one of the top presenters at the seminar.
I love going to that thing. It's such a, if you want a total immersion in everything elk hunting and get to rub shoulders with the giant killer, Lampers himself. He hates when I call him that. It's just, the first year I was kind of like, I don't know, Ryan, how this is going to work. I mean, you're going to get these dudes together. They're going to fly into town. They're going to go.
You got Randy Newberg and Remy Warren, and you got some people that have been around a while that kill some stuff.
This year, I'm like the low man on the totem pole for the speakers this year. But so the first year, I'll tell a quick story before we get started. So the first year when Ryan was playing this thing, the first problem he did was when he was planning the hike. It was him and Brian Barney planning it.
Yeah.
And I said, they called me up and said, hey, we're thinking about going here and here. And I said, here's a waypoint. I'm looking on the map.
Oh, told me.
I know I'm not saying I'm the best e-scouter, but when he sent me the waypoint, I'm like, Ryan, that's like 18 miles, right? Well, they really I want them to feel like they're getting
their money's worth.
I'm like, Ryan, you got 40 dudes coming from all over the country, flatlanders.
Yeah, some dude from Minnesota.
All different levels of ability, and you're going to
Kansas
destroy them the first day right out of the gate.
Oh, we had that discussion. He's like, because I was thinking about attending, and I'm like, I don't want to attend that. You're going to.
Well, he had me word that I couldn't even make it to the camp. I was like, so I brought the llamas and everything.
Well, the thing is I hunt with Ryan all the time, and he's not going to wait for anybody.
Well, he did in that one.
Did he?
He didn't want to do it. So we had a couple slower guys from the Midwest.
Yeah.
And Ryan had to come up with the back group. It took 6-7 hours.
Yeah.
It took 6-7 hours to get to camp.
Yeah.
And that's after we adjusted it to 7 miles.
I also heard that when you got back, you immediately did a Mountain Tough workout, which then just crushed souls. And it was so intense, the workout, that people couldn't. They were so sore and so tired the next day. They had a hard time listening through the seminars.
It was
so definitely he's learned his summits are just improving every time. They're getting better and better.
They're not. I mean, there's nothing easy about it. Let's be honest. But it is definitely not like the first year.
It's not that hard though. I mean,
it was pretty hard the first year.
The first year, yeah,
it was pretty hard.
I think he learned that he didn't need to do that to have a great class. That I've hunted with Ryan, and there's a certain amount of if he kills an animal on the first day and there wasn't any suffering, it doesn't feel like it was a hunt. There's got to be, you got to feel like you earned it or it's not as rewarding. And I'm like, I'll take the opportunities as they come. If I get a freebie, I'm taking it.
So anyway, the summit's really great, and that's really what got me
into
3 years ago is really what pushed the button for me to the feedback from that and just the response.
This is so funny because this e-scouting stuff that you put together, you've just been a nerd over this for 30 years.
Well, I've been behind the scenes. I'm one of those guys that I've just been doing this I'm from the Midwest. We've talked about this. I'm from Missouri, 25 years in a row of elk hunting from Missouri.
Right.
And I'm one of these guys too, Brian. You're kind of the same way. I'm an adventurer by soul, and I don't like to go back to the same spots. I just do not like to do it. And everybody's like, man, Mark, you saw all these elk. Why aren't I'm like, that spot's dead to me. I mean,
Lampers is a little bit like that. Let's go back to where we saw those giant, whatever. And he's like, or let's go someplace completely new.
Yeah, So if you're going to come from the east for and hunt 3-4 different states,
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to hunt a different spot every year,
Yeah.
you got to develop
You got to
some
learn
skills.
it. Yeah, and I think what happened here is Lampers was kind of asking you a few questions about some scouting, and you put a hunt plan to him for him together, and you're like, he saw it and he goes like, whoa, we need to talk because you know some stuff.
Well, it was kind of weird how we met and kind of started talking about e-scouting, and I think once we talked about a Wyoming hunt that he was getting ready to do.
Mm-hmm.
I looked at a few spots for him, and we just started talking about different things and Google Earth. And he says, "Man, I want you to come to the Hunt Summit." So I was super nervous. My first time showing people what I kind of do, and he gives me like this 2-hour slot, and I'm like, "Oh man, 2 hours of e-scouting." But it went great, and the people well,
your slide deck and all that stuff, which it's just part of your course too.
Yeah,
and so. I think it's really cool. So far in our little Art of Finding Elk series we've been putting on these weekly shows, we've kind of laid the foundation, like
right.
what tools and what, how do you plan and
kind of theory
what are your limitations, right? And now we're kind of diving into what do you look for when you're actually looking through when you're e-scouting. What are the elk finding features that are out there and how do they work? So this is the first time we're going to dive into that. And this time it's meadows and feeding zones. And I think we're going to hit benches and slopes in the same one.
So I want to start off by saying these are in no particular order.
Okay.
Because everybody's like, well, so meadows is number
right,
one.
That's
well, the reason I did it in kind of the order of hunter popularity.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do guys get fixated on?
Right.
We've talked about this in previous modules. I feel one of the pitfalls of e-scouting and just guys planning their elk hunts in general is that they get fixated on one particular feature or the other. Like they particularly like to hunt burns. You know, there's guys that just love to hunt elk in burns. There's nothing wrong with that. I love hunting burns myself.
I know.
But there's so many other features that if you could combine, I call it odds multiplier. I know I sound like a broken record here, but I just really want to drive that home is when I'm evaluating an area for potential elk holding capabilities, I'm looking for areas that have multiples of the things we're getting ready to talk about.
Right.
Not just one.
I've been with some dudes that are doing some planning and they look on Google Earth and they're like, meadow here, meadow here, meadow
That's
here,
it.
meadow there, meadow there. We could hit all these meadows if we just go here, here, and here. And you're like, but that what you're saying, that's one feature.
Now, that could work out.
Yeah.
But remember what you're trying to do when you're trying to elk hunt, Brian, in my opinion, what you're trying to do is take that 10% success rate for the average DIY, non-resident public land elk hunter, and you're trying to multiply that 10%. Okay. You're never going to hit 100, probably.
Yeah.
Until you become Brian Caller, Ryan Lampers. You're just not going to come out west and kill an elk every single year, probably for the rest of your life. But what you're trying to do is make increase your odds.
Yeah.
And that's what this course is entirely. Everything about it, everything I've tried to do is
put you in the game.
Not tell you how to be the best hunter. I'm not in that position, guys. I'm not the best hunter. I'm still learning. I learn from Ryan every time I talk to him about the way he approaches it and how especially mule deer, man. I'm like a sponge with him with mule deer. Yeah. But when it comes to elk, I'm pretty good at finding the elk. And that's job one.
Right.
I mean, we've talked about this. It doesn't matter how great of a hunter you are. If you can't find them and get in them, you can't kill them. So number one is meadows. And the reason I start with number one is because that's the hunter magnet of all magnets.
Right.
Guys look at aerial photos. They see this big meadow and they start marching towards it. So what I decided to do with meadows, the way I approached it is in the course, there are 10 meadow rules that I live by. I mean, there's nothing in this also, I'm going to add this. There's nothing in this course that I personally do not follow like virtually a religion.
Yep.
So there's 10 meadow rules in the course that I live by. And I thought we'd just include a couple.
Let's do it.
So the first one is no large meadows within 2 miles of the road. I don't even look at them. Because every hunter on the planet Earth is looking at those 2 meadows. Is those meadows there within 2 miles? Agreed. Oh, look at that big meadow. And
Yep.
even worse is a meadow that is within 2 miles of the road and has a trail running to it. That's even a worse meadow.
Right.
I can almost guarantee you in the West, if you go to a meadow like that and find one, there's going to be a blind or two, little makeshift blind. If you walk the perimeter, there's going to be something where dudes have been setting up.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to kill an elk there. That does not mean that. Remember what we're talking about here, odds multipliers.
Yeah.
So the odds are against you on a meadow like that.
Right.
Doesn't mean that lightning's not going to strike and a
Right.
big old bull's going to walk right out in there. Now, 2 miles from the
I've done
road
that
meadow.
before where I've gone into an area and I'm like, there's a meadow right here. And there's like 9 guys in it.
That's right.
And I'm like, good luck. And I climb to the top of a mountain. And some big old herd walks in and a dude shoots a 6x6. He's never hunted
It happens.
elk before. And you're like, what?
Every time I say something like this, I get comments like, dude, it happened to me. I killed a bull. I'm like, of course it does.
Right.
Guys, of course it does.
But it's not. It's happened once in my life. Where
Yeah.
I've seen
So,
it.
and again, I know that sounds obvious, but it's still funny. As obvious and as much as that makes sense,
Yeah.
how many dudes still do it?
Oh, dude.
They'll set up a base camp.
I think it's wishful thinking. Almost,
It is. Because
you know?
how nice is it when a big old bull walks out of the middle,
Right.
comes around the perimeter, walks right in front of you and you shoot? I mean, it's like what the Primos videos back in the old, I mean,
Yep.
every elk that got killed in the Primos videos
you're
walking
dreaming of that.
wide open
Yeah.
right by you.
And if you don't know anything else to look for, you're going to go meadow. That's what elk want. I mean,
So when I look at meadows, that's one of the first rules is I avoid large meadows that are close to the roads or access points.
okay. Uh-huh.
Now, if I find a place like that, that doesn't mean that the elk are not using it.
Yeah.
It just means they're going to maybe be using in the hours that you can't shoot them.
Right.
Maybe in the evening, maybe late at night. So if I find a place like that and I'm still interested in that spot, I will look for features that are outside of that.
Yep.
Leading to that meadow. How are they getting there? Where are the other elk finding features in relation to these large meadows? And I'll start maybe looking at those more than I'm focusing in on the meadow. Does that make sense?
For sure.
So that's a big.
Well, that's exactly what we do.
Yeah. So meadows are important to elk, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
for certain times a year.
Because there are when elk are rutting hard and they have certain meadows they want to come to. I swear they come off the top of those mountains where they're bedded all day. And they're
Long
eager,
distances.
5-7 miles.
It's nothing for them to do that.
And then they get there, and it's beyond shooting light.
That's right.
And then they rut, and they scream, and they rut, and you could be camped right next to the meadow. You'd be 50 yards from that meadow, and they'll just come in. They don't care.
Yeah.
And they'll rut all night, and then you get up in the morning, you're like, we're going to kill a bull. And then just as the sun is coming up, they move en masse up the mountain with the wind in their face.
Yeah.
And so what you're saying, it makes perfect sense, looking for the features or the area where they might go to bed rather than looking for the areas.
Bed, where they'll hit water on the way back, where they may even feed, an opportunity for them to continue feeding on the way back.
Yeah, they love to do that.
It's just they elk like to just. I've found that so many elk, especially in the rut, the bulls, will do a lot of their feeding when they're kind of done with that rutting, chasing on their way back to the bed. They'll just
They're trying to grab their last minute.
grab their last bites on the way. So that's one of the rules. So another thing that I like to look for is, I know this is going to sound weird, but I look for meadows that have the most edges. Okay, I know I want to explain myself on that.
Surface area edges.
Surface area edges. So if you think about a pond,
Yep.
you've got a circumference around that pond. But you think about a lake that has all of the tributaries and channels and inlets. The shoreline is
so much bigger.
quadruple 10 times.
Yeah.
Those are the types of meadows I look for because most people think elk eat grass all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's not true. Mm-hmm. They actually like woody plants and
Leaves.
most of the year they don't eat grass. Mm-hmm. There's actually a pretty small period of time that they really focus on grass in the spring. And it's not usually during hunting season, unfortunately. Now, everybody sees them when they're out nibbling on the grass, but they will browse a lot of woody plants, forbs, flowering plants, all kinds of things. I have a whole module. We're not going to cover it in this thing, but I have a whole module on the basic needs of elk where I go through the food, what types of year they're looking for this food. research that I've done, all the research studies. I got links to all the studies that have looked at elk, where they browse, how they browse, what times of year they eat, what kinds of food in different geographical areas. And Colorado's different than Montana.
Yeah.
But when it comes to the meadows, I have found a lot of success in these irregular shaped meadows. Okay.
Yeah.
So kind of a rule number, I don't know what number it is or whatever, but one of my rules is kind of that, looking for those meadows that are just not the little round meadow in the middle of the timber. Now, it doesn't mean it's not a good spot. It's just I really get excited when I see these meadows with these little fingers going out, these little drainages. Because what that means to me, Brian, is that when you see that feature, it tells me that there's a diverse amount of habitat in that meadow. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be all just lush green grass. It's going to be bushes and plant and forbs and some grasses and some sedges and different things like that.
I think there's shade for cover.
Exactly.
Then you also have like different browsing options, and they can move in and out between all of that all at the same time. So, because you see them packed into areas where, because the sunlight breaks through on those meadows, so the more edges there, you know, you're going to have that sunlight coming through. You're going to have a lot of stuff that they like to eat, but then I think it gets hot. They like to just wander right there and wander back, especially if it's earlier in the season.
Well, you know how in September, a lot of times when stuff starts to really dry up, there's kind of a, you know, this is a general thing, like for Montana, for example. A lot of times what happens is by September, we're a semi-arid environment in Montana. So by the time September comes, the grasses are getting pretty dry. Yeah. But on the edges where there's shade, they stay greener longer. So the more edge there is of this meadow, the more green there's going to be generally on a meadow. Mm-hmm. Now I'm talking in generalities. Yeah. Now then a lot of times in September, as you know, in Montana, again, we get some rain in September a lot. Mm-hmm. Snow early, rain early. Mm-hmm. And that tends to green the grasses back up. And that can cause the elk to switch back to maybe more of the meadow. Right. So anyway, these irregular shaped meadows are key for me. But one of the most attractive meadows that I look for, I say this all the time in the course, is dispersed meadows environments. And when I say dispersed meadows, what I mean by that is chain meadows, or little tiny. You've seen places where there's just, it looks like the land of lakes. Mm-hmm. It's just a bunch of little meadows all up and down the slope. Man, those places seem to be gold. Now, if you can find those dispersed meadow environments next to other elk finding features, it's money. Yeah. We're going to talk about benches, but just for example, you find dispersed meadows in the bottom of this drainage that's got a wide, flat bottom. We'll talk about that when we get to that. But wide, flat bottom drainages hold more moisture than the V bottom drainages. Mm-hmm. So when I find those wide, flat bottom drainage with no trail, established trail on the map in the bottom, I find the dispersed meadows that kind of run up the slope, a north slope with a bench that's like 3/4 of the way up. Yeah. And there's a saddle directly above that bench. I start getting excited. Because what I just said right there, we've got a saddle feature, a bench feature, a north slope feature, a dispersed meadow feature, a flat bottom drainage, and no trail in the bottom. That's 6 elk finding features in the same spot. Yeah.
That's where all of the elk were basically this year for me and Brad.
Well, that's where they are. That's where they are for everybody.
You just described the exact spot where we ran into like 200 elk. Well, like multiple herds clashing with each other. You know, that's exactly the spot. The saddle, and the thing is there's only 2 saddles really into this whole thing, and those 2 saddles just were little highways back and forth where these elk would come in and out, and then you had and it's a more arid zone a little bit where we were at. And so at the bottom, you had your water sources, and they hammer the water. I mean, so very, and then those benches, they love those benches.
We're going to talk about that coming up. I'm trying to avoid not getting ahead of ourselves, because benches that's probably one of my favorite features to focus on. If I have tunnel vision at all when it comes to e-scouting, benches get me excited. Yeah. Well, they just love them. And especially, I don't want to say it. We're going to get to that.
We couldn't find mule deer this year in our late season. We found some benches, and it was just like, that's where they were. Yeah. Piles of them. Piles of them. So green grass and little melted snow up there on these benches, covered in trees in a burn. And it was like,
it doesn't take much either. When people think of benches, they think they got to look on the map. They got to find this contour with this.
No, it's a pathetic little green spot.
It doesn't have to be what Now, it is nice to find those big ones because I think that, kind of the bigger, more prominent ones that are more isolated that have access to these other elk finding features, if you can find those kind of places, they tend to hold larger populations of elk, maybe.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean they're going to all hold elk, but they are attractive features, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
So when it comes to meadows, try not to get fixed in the course. We try not to get people. They're important to elk for rutting, especially. They like to elk like to rut in the open.
Yeah.
Now, people, as soon as I say that, northern Idaho are going to be like, we don't have any meadows, because elk. Well, guys,
no,
that's why
I've hunted northern Idaho, which I don't want to do it anymore.
Well,
they still go to whatever vestige of a meadow there is.
Little bit, whatever there is.
That's
right.
what they go to.
So when
they'll rut in the trees on their way back, but generally there's only a select number of meadows when you're talking North Idaho, and it's that thick.
That's right.
Where were they? In those select few meadows, like clockwork.
Or sparse timber.
The problem was, and it was mixed with sparse timber. The problem was, I swear, the wind patterns, and it was so unapproachable, and they're just smart. They would move before you could get on them in those places.
Yeah. So, you can't apply every rule to every area. Just like we just said, there has to be some adaptation.
Well, what I like about this is you're honing in on some of those meadows, but you're saying
it's just one.
But you're saying, look for these other areas surrounding the meadows.
That's right.
I think that's the key part. Because
lead-ins.
I'm not killing bulls in meadows much. I'm killing them in the other places.
Well, archery season, which is a lot of this course is focused on archery.
Yeah.
It's hard to call elk cross meadows and deal with meadows. Mm-hmm. They've got a huge advantage. Mm-hmm. When you're hunting elk and you're trying to call elk, I know you like to get down and dirty, spot and stalk them, but if you are one of those guys that like to call elk, meadows are your enemy.
Yeah.
They work those meadows and they understand how to work them.
Yeah.
They get on one side and they would dare you to come out.
Yeah, I've done that so many times. I've called elk for years, and I've only stopped calling in the last three years. And then last year, I didn't blow a single call the whole season.
Really? That's crazy.
Until the second bull I killed, I went, stopped him and shot him. That's the only call I blew the whole time.
I do still love calling elk. So
I do like it, but I didn't need to.
Yeah.
They were sounding off, or I had visibility, either or on every hunt. So I was like, I don't want to give away anything to these elk. And I did focus on meadows and feeding areas and rutting areas, but I killed them in their bedding areas.
Yeah.
I killed them where they wanted to spend the whole day, not where they were in the morning and the evening, or I killed them on their way to. That was really in Montana. That's my whole strategy, was killing them on their way to their feeding area or on their way back from their feeding area. So in the morning, they're on their way back. I knew exactly where they were going to spend the whole day. Mm-hmm. I was just there right in a little pinch point where I could keep the wind, and they would come within bow range.
Yeah.
And I just waited day after day after day.
We talked about
and I had I was 3 to 5 seconds from releasing an arrow on a giant bull every morning and every evening, almost like clockwork. The middle of the day was a little boring. I just sleep on the slope because you can't. Once you sneak in, I couldn't sneak out because I'm surrounded by elk, and they're rutting and chasing. And every now and then, I had to have cows just walk right by me within 3 feet and almost step on me, and then smell me and run. But there's so many elk and so much chaos, they will run. They're like, but where is it?
Yeah.
And then they can't pick me up again because of the way the wind flowed, and I was on steep hillsides. I love thermals and understanding the way the wind blows, and having hunted whitetail and blacktail for a long time in different, even though the wind swirls, there are land features where if you just sit still in certain spots, your wind goes over the top. Yeah. It's a consistent directional every day one way, with thermals doing something else, which combined keeps that scent. You wouldn't think you could sit right there, and yet you can.
Yeah.
And but I'm using the feeding bedding transition spot to kill. I mean, it's hard to kill them where they're actually bedded. Yeah. That's why they bed there.
Well, they're surrounded too. Mm-hmm. They've got a lot of security. They've got a lot of sentries.
I don't want to just kill a bull now. I want to kill the bull. And so it's really hard. Earlier in the season, in more open country, the wind was more reliable, but you have 100 elk all running around, and the bulls the middle of them.
Yeah.
And so you our strategy there was you just get to the edge of it and you wait for them to
come to check around the edge, you know, whatever. Great strategy. And that's a lot of guys are using that strategy to kill herd bulls. There's not a lot of other strategies that work. They're hard to deal with. They're really hard to deal with.
I mean, that's my whole thing is calling in a herd bull has proven like
it's difficult.
It's really hard because we could call in just bulls, lots of bulls, and kill them. And it's fun because a lesser bull has been kicked out. You know, he's horny. He's not getting satisfied. You're on the edge of the herd. You sound like an option, and they make the mistake. But that big bull, he has 2 hot cows right there with him. Why is he going to leave those?
Yeah.
So he usually will only leave, I feel, if he's threatened or he's pissed off. You're more likely to get one to come to you because you're bugling in his face, and he's like, "Who the hell are you?" Yeah. And you're kind of appealing to his ego or whatnot. But I have a hard time with the calling. But that's why I like to be sneaky. But where to be sneaky?
Well, I'm going to have to start trying more stalking. You know, I have not really hunted open elk cutting country till I moved to Montana. Mm-hmm. I've always been a deep timber calling guy.
Right.
And I've just always, I don't know why I've over the years have sought out those places a lot. Mm-hmm. But since I moved to Montana, the past 5 years, I have been branching out, doing a little more open country hunting.
Yeah.
You see a lot more elk.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean there's more elk. You just see more.
Right.
Now, sometimes that's frustrating because you see a lot, but your opportunities you got to work those open areas and you got to understand how they're moving. Mm-hmm. So meadows, that's a great point. So meadows don't necessarily apply when you've got an area that's freaking open.
Yeah.
I mean, that you might as well
the whole thing's a meadow.
Yeah. Throw that feature out the window. Then you're going to focus on the other features.
Green.
The benches, the slope angles, which we're going to talk about next. So wrap up with the meadows. Large meadows close to the road, one of the first rules. I mean, it sounds obvious. Yep. And I threw that one in because it sounds so obvious, but a lot of guys need reminders.
Yeah, sometimes. Well, a lot of guys will spend 3 days there and waste a lot of their
And what happens is let's say there's a little snow on the ground. In the example you said, you go out there and there's tracks everywhere. Mm-hmm. There's elk all over this meadow.
Right.
And you spend 3 days chasing elk in that meadow and you've never seen one there.
Yep.
But they're there. Their tracks are there. They're just not there when you're there.
Right.
And they can really be a time drain. It can be a time suck on a hunt.
That's right.
Chasing elk that are not spending any time there. There's a place that I hunt that I have hunted that these elk would leave a couple hours before light.
Yep.
And they were already halfway up the freaking mountain. But there's tracks and sign and scat, rubs all over this meadow. And it looks like you could just sit there and kill elk all day long.
So what I've done in those situations, this is less e-scouting, but when I know they're in the meadow at night, I can hear them. Sometimes they're silent; they don't talk, but you can still hear or see elk in a full moon just out in the meadow. And we do a lot of night scouting. Like in the middle of the night, we're calling, we're bugling, we're doing all this stuff, we're walking around.
Killer tactic.
When I know they're in that meadow, I am prepared to chase them up the mountain. And we had these elk in this meadow in Colorado 2-3 days in a row. And they would climb this steep face. And it was just gross. And it was hard to get through and fight through. And then they hit a saddle and they come up and they go up to another. And I'm like, where did they go? You know? So I chased them 7 miles. I wanted to know where they're bedding every day. And it was a hell of a run. You know, I was like, and I'm just keeping them in earshot because they're talking the whole way up the mountain. And I'm like, how far are they going to go? How far are they going to go?
It surprises me sometimes.
But I was able to tail them all the way to their bedding area. And then what was ironic was there was like 4 or 5 herds who all bedded on the same slope on the same hillside.
But we're coming from different places.
Totally different places, but they were all congregating in this hotbed of aspen groves and bedding area. And then they all herd up and they all went to different meadows again at night. Well, you know, just running them down was the ticket. And then getting up there, I was able to find wallows everywhere. And those bulls are too antsy to just stay there all day with their cows. And I sat down by a wallow, and big bull snuck off from his cows to wallow a little bit, and I shot him.
Yeah,
you know, but the chasing them to their bedding area, you know, I probably could have had it done a little more e-scouting. Although the 7 miles was way more.
I don't know that you might pick that out 7 miles. I mean, those are hard to do. So it's funny you said that because if you take the time to mark your meadows, I mark all the feeding areas, whether I'm excited about it or not, I will mark them because what you want to see is a pattern. So number one, I mark them. Number two, I develop a custom markup system for my e-scouting. Everybody has to kind of do their own, talk about it in the course. I give you some ideas, but I have a marker that I use for meadows. I have a marker that I use for, so the reason I do that, I don't just drop the red pin everywhere because then it gets to be like, okay, what am I looking at here? But if you can develop an icon system, so to speak, your own system, whatever works for you. And, you look at your map once you've marked it up with all these features, it just starts to make sense. You're like, okay, we've got some meadows here, we've got benches here, and we've got this barn edge here. And so what I'm looking for are places that have the most elk finding features, right? So once you mark all the features and you look at your map, it's going to be obvious to you where you need to start focusing your attention. You know, if you've got a cluster of waypoints over here, but you've got a bench over here, that doesn't mean this bench isn't going to be good. But I'm going to start out where this cluster of benches, fire edges, meadows, north slope, a saddle above this bench, all this is over here, but this one feature is over here. Even though this is a really nice looking feature, I will start my hunt with taking the low hanging fruit. I will start here, and then I might hit some of these. But so does that make sense? What I'm saying is looking for clusters of elk finding features. Once you start dropping the pins for all these features we're going to start talking about, it will start making sense to you in your hunt plan, what you need to do.
Now you're mentioning it, it's kind of intuitive for me at this point, but that's pretty much what I'm doing.
We've talked about that almost every single segment. A lot of guys that have been doing it for so long don't even realize that they're already doing it in their head subliminally. But guys that are learning how to elk hunt are trying to kill more elk or trying to expand their capabilities. It may not be as intuitive to them yet. They haven't got the experience in the field yet. And so that's what we're trying to do.
It's funny. Like I know where a lot of these areas are where it's all where you have 7 or 8 of these features you're talking about all in one spot, and they'll be there till they get pushed and they get pushed out. And then I know where they're going to probably be a secondary and a tertiary and a fourth. Like I know and I know in 3 days they'll come back to that, especially on a Tuesday or a Wednesday or Thursday when all the hunters have gone home for the weekend. They're going to come back to this particular spot. And you start to figure that out. And I can recall being in some areas where I spent 7 or 8 days looking for elk, looking and looking and looking, only to find out that I was looking at 6,000 feet and they were at 11,000 feet. And they were all at 11,000 feet, all of them. Because at 6,000 feet, there was a billion guys trying to kill them. At 11 and 12,000, there was nobody there.
Well,
and the food was better up there.
It happened to be a high moisture year.
Yeah.
You know,
the snow had melted and there was all these little sparse timber and meadow pockets and wallows everywhere. So that's another thing I wanted to bring up real quick because I'm sure it's one of those elk finding features. But I see dudes find a wallow and then they spend their whole hunt around the wallow. I'd say they focus on wallows, not necessarily during the e-scouting phase, but when they find one in the woods, it's like that's where they're going to spend their time. Not realizing that those elk quit hitting that wallow 5 days earlier.
Yeah.
Or
if they do, I mean, think about it. Even if you're sitting there sun up to sundown, you're missing half the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, that's not totally true in the fall when you got in Montana, the sun comes up at 5 sets at 10.
Right.
But that's a long set. And it doesn't mean you can't kill them there, guys. That doesn't mean, but they've got the advantage, okay, on a wallow because they're going to approach it with the wind. They're not stupid.
Right.
Well, some are. They get stupid, and then they make a mistake.
Well, that's what the great equalizer. The rut is the great equalizer.
That's right. So,
because what they're going to do in the height of an impassioned moment is a whole lot different than what they do when their brains are and they have their wits about them.
So the Wallows module is one that's coming up. Okay. Wallows and water. I don't know if we're going to cover it in our series here, but in the course, it's not even done yet. I'm working on it still. One of my favorite tactics for wallows, since a lot of them are in meadows sometimes, is if I can set far away from a wallow. That's my best tactic. If I can set 100, 200 yards away, if I can still see it, if I can find a vantage spot where I can see from that distance, and they come in, and then I can work the wind and stalk in. I have found that to be a much better successful formula for wallows for me than setting right on them and dealing with the wind.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
No, that's exactly what I do. I don't sit on the wallow because they're too alert. They're too ready.
They come in alert and they come in with the wind.
But there's usually 3 or 4 entries into the wallow. All I got to do is sit 150, 200 yards from the wallow on an entry point, a funnel, a pinch point where they walk down a little trail that's well worn. And maybe the bull comes and hits in the wallow and everything from that spot. But the odds of me being right on the wallow and him getting into it without being spooked is pretty low, especially with swirling winds.
That's right.
But if you get a couple hundred yards or 100 yards away, and it's same with blacktail. You know, a lot of guys would sit over these apple orchards. We had a bunch of apple orchards in Oregon City, and those deer would hammer those things all night, mind you, mostly during the night. But the does would hit it all day.
Yeah.
And then during the rut, the does would be there just chowing these rotten apples on the ground. And these bucks, they'll never come in to those apples. They just sit in the tree line. Yeah. They just sit in the cover waiting for those does to come back. And they're dying. They're like, she's hot. She's in heat. Come on. And you sit in those staging areas on the outside and you wait for those bucks to cruise. And that's where you kill them. Don't actually, and too many guys just go hunt the apples.
Yeah.
And you're like, no, that's not where the big bucks are. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in hunting the trails to the wallows rather than
trails or a vantage spot and doing a stalk. Because one of the things about the elk and a wallow I have found personally is once they're committed to a wallow,
they lose their mind.
That's when they get stupid.
Yeah. Once
they're in the mud and they're just having a good time, that's when they lower their senses.
Yeah.
It's not the approach though. They're on super high alert on the approach. But
in fact, once they drink a little bit, and you see it if you watch those like African films, right? And the gazelle sneaks down to the water and it's freaked out and they run from the water and they come back and then once everyone starts drinking and there's 6 gazelles drinking, dude, you could dance a jig over there and they're not going to run away. That's right.
Same with elk, I think. Well, again, we're talking in generalities here. It's not a guarantee. But so anyway, and I know we're a little ahead of ourselves there, but so one of the tools that I use real quick on Meadows is don't forget that historical timeline slider in Google Earth for Meadows. Very important.
Why?
Sliding it to September and seeing how green certain meadows are during the month and the time you're going to be hunting. I do this all the time. For example, I found this remote area of dispersed meadows. Okay, let's say there's just a chain, 40, 50 meadows just all down this mountain. Well, how are you going to hunt those 40? Which one of those 40 or 50 are you going to kind of focus on? What's your approach? Where are you going to come from? How are you going to get in there? What are you going to do? Well, one of the quick, easy ways to start, what I do is I will get into Google Earth. It's the only tool that you can use for this. The other platforms, you can't. It's not an option, obviously. And you slide that timeline slider, look at and slide to the date, hit September. Which one of those meadows is the greenest in September? There's a chain. Which one of them is showing up in the aerial photo as the brightest green? What that means to me is it's not a guarantee, but what it means to me is that might be the meadow with the most moisture. Or maybe there's a seep there or something is making that meadow stand out amongst this whole chain, right?
Yeah.
Now, a lot of times you're going to look at it and they all look similar. Okay, great. But it's just one more tool in your toolbox. You've got a bunch of meadows. Let's say you're hunting an area with a whole bunch of little meadows and they're spread out over miles. I want to which one looks the most attractive?
Yeah.
During the time that you're hunting, not just in October or November or June.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at Google Earth and see a June image, right, everything looks green.
Yeah.
Okay? You can't.
Well, what you're describing here is very, very useful for bear hunting in the spring.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's exactly what we're doing is we're looking for these chartreuse.
You're looking for avalanche shoots that are greener than others.
Yeah.
Well, what better way to slide back to
what gets green the very first? Is kind of the goal. Because as soon as the bears pop out, when there's only 2 spots that are green on the whole 7-mile radius, there's going to be a bear there.
Yeah.
As soon as everything turns green and they're rutting, There are bears everywhere. It's so much harder to kill them. Yeah. So killing them right as they come out and right in the only green spots, it's money.
Well, elk are the same. You know, that doesn't mean they're not going to feed in a meadow that's not the greenest. But what are we trying to do here? We're trying to increase your odds.
Yeah.
The odds are better in that green one.
Right.
Okay. Not 100%, but they're better.
Right.
So with meadows, use your timeline slider to look for the month that you're going to hunt. Now, a lot of times they may not be a September image.
Right.
Okay. Or the September image might be clear back to 1988.
Right.
And the quality of the image back then was not as good.
Yeah.
But you still can see the green. You still can use it. It's still usable.
Yeah.
It's just not as good maybe as the thing. So that's a case where you're going to want to get away from the hunt platforms. When I say hunt platforms, I'm meaning Onyx, Gaia, Basemap, those mobile or even online platforms. Because one, like we've said this before, they don't have the dates of the imagery. You don't even know what date you're looking at.
Yeah.
And you can't change it. It's what you got.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's not a very good meadow evaluation tool.
Yeah.
The platforms are not.
Totally makes sense.
Google Earth is the best when it comes to meadow evaluation.
That's powerful.
Okay. So benches and slopes. We'll kind of finish up with that.
Is that
okay?
Yes.
This is where guys get real worked up about benches. When we talk about benches, everybody's thinking about, we got to go back to the basics of contours here. Everyone knows what a bench is going to look like. You've got these contour lines that are coming down the slope, and then you got this one area where the contour line kind of swings out.
Yep.
I know we're on a podcast, so it's hard to visualize, but I think everybody can relate to what a bench is.
It's like the hill's super steep, and then all of a sudden there's a flat spot.
You got lines close to close. All of a sudden you got a gap.
Yep.
Okay. Those are kind of what we call benches.
Right.
If the lines are parallel. Now, if they're running in a V or something, you're dealing more with a drainage or a ridge. So, but in a case where there's a bubble, so to speak, of contour lines, creates this bench. Okay, so you've heard a lot of people talk. Randy Newberry talks about, I agree with what Randy says about benches. I think he's spot on. I go one step further with that. I like to find benches. This is the ideal bench for me.
Okay.
A bench that is above a flat bottom drainage. I talk about flat bottom drains all the time. Now, I don't mean, it doesn't have to be that flat.
Yeah.
I'm talking anything that's not a V. Well, now, how do you tell the V? You're looking at the contour lines.
Yeah, but the flat bottage drainages almost are always green, and the V ones aren't.
That's right. There's not much feed in the V drainages.
Yeah.
So if your contour lines in your drainage come straight down, straight up, that's a V. If it goes down and kind of flat and then up, and I'm talking doesn't take much.
No.
So if you can find drainages that have this flatter bottom, you don't have to look for miles wide. I'm talking 100 yards wide.
50.
Exactly. And then you can find benches that are 3/4 of the way. It's almost magic.
That's where all the elk were this year.
3/4. I think the thermals, the wind patterns, the cooling effect, everything is better for them. Escape options.
Yeah.
Right close to the top, but not right on the top.
Yep.
I love those benches that are 3/4 of the way up.
And that's what I love to kill bulls.
That's one of my favorite places
usually
to call elk.
In the afternoon, those thermals are moving up the hill. Now, certain timbered areas and stuff can be trickier.
Right.
But in general, a lot of those benches they sit on have a decent wind. Especially if there's
predictable winds for them.
Especially if there's a little bit of cloud cover and you get a little directional where the thermals are stronger, you can then just ease your way down to that bench from above, and those thermals are pushing the air
or
up.
Parallel.
Yes, or parallel.
Depending on how you're going to approach it.
I like coming from above and just getting close within bow range, inch by inch. I feel like I've been able to stalk a lot of elk that way. I used to get that close and then scream at them. Now I don't. I just get that close and just kill them. Like this bugling to get the bull to come to me. I mean, you can just blow up the whole group. Yeah. You don't know what's going to happen. And once they know you're there, everything changes.
You kind of sound like an anti-caller now, Brian.
I kind of am. I'm telling you, because you get in that spot. But that's where they're at, 3/4 of the way up. If they go too high toward the very, very top, I don't like those benches or those spots because that wind blows over the top and comes right back down or blows across, and you don't get enough consistent wind. 3/4 of the way up or halfway up, you're getting a much more consistent
When I say 3/4 of the way, maybe I should. I like half to 3/4. 3/4 being ideal, but I have found that halfway will be acceptable. Especially, let's go one step further. So now we found this bench that's halfway to 3/4. What I really like is when there's steep terrain above and below. So what I mean is if there's a gentle slope up and there's a bench and then there's a gentle slope past the bench,
they could be
still good, still good.
Yeah.
But they're harder to predict.
Yeah.
When you got super steep and a bench and super steep and that's 3/4, oh man, kind of makes me get excited talking about it.
Right.
So I look for super steep above. When I say super steep, I mean relatively steep. 20 degree, more that 20-degree range.
Sure.
Or below. Or both, if it's really ideal.
Yeah.
I love benches that are backed up against avalanche chutes that are real steep, where they can feed up on that avalanche chute and come right down to that bench. I really love those kind of benches. In the examples in the bench areas, I cover a whole bunch of options and show you different kinds of benches in different kinds of environments. So again, another tip, the steeper the terrain, okay, the more steep it is, the more important the benches become to elk. Remember that.
Yeah.
The more rolling the terrain, the less important benches. So as an elk finding feature, benches are not as important in rolling country. When I say rolling, moderately steep.
Yeah, sure.
Versus northern Idaho, super steep. And benches are more important in steep country, and they're also more important where there's not as many benches. So if there's benches everywhere, obviously, it makes sense. It's hard to pinpoint which one they're going to be on. Let's say you got this bowl in the example.
Beautiful flat green bottom.
Yeah, no trail on the bottom, flat green bottom, green everywhere. And you got this bowl, and it's just steep.
Yeah.
It's just gnarly.
Yeah.
And there's this one bump in the back, halfway to 3/4 of the way up.
Right.
I can almost guarantee you there's elk there.
And if there's one extreme saddle that leads into that
right
bowl,
above it.
Yeah.
So that gets me to my next. So when I see benches that are on a slope that are north face and it's got steep above and steep below, I get excited, right? I get triple excited when I find that with a saddle directly above it.
Yeah.
And when I say saddle, Brian, I'm not talking like the Grand Canyon saddle. Even the slightest saddle above a bench that has got the steep. Oh, man, I can't tell you how good that spot is.
Yeah.
Flat bottom drainage, saddle up there above the bench. It is a gold. Think about what we just said. Elk like saddles. They just do. They love these benches. They like the north slopes. They like the steepness. They like the flat bottoms. They like the feeding. They like the high moisture content. That's 5 or 6 features right there in the same area.
Right.
That's that cluster that we were talking about. That's one of those areas that's going to present, once you put your points on, it's going to present as a cluster. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So when you find those, as obvious as that sounds, sometimes those are hard to pick out until you start dropping the pins. It starts resonating with you, especially if you don't have a lot of experience. You can I know we talk about Ryan a lot just because he's a friend. He's a common friend of ours, but Ryan doesn't realize, I'm just going to speak for Ryan.
Yeah.
When he looks at a spot in his head, it's running that scenario.
Yeah.
He doesn't even know it's running that scenario, but he's like, elk are going to be right there. He doesn't know why they're going to be there.
Yeah.
He just knows all that experience is filtering through that. Now, he probably does know. I'm just kind of kidding. But you know what I'm saying? He doesn't realize that he's putting all those pieces together naturally.
When I, like some of this open country, you really see the way elk move when you hunt an area that has no trees, 0. And you watch them over the course of weeks in this kind of country, and you see how much they leverage saddles and benches.
The smallest of small.
And you're like, wow, they covered, 5 miles from this spot to this spot, and I watched them the whole time. and they didn't climb any hill extra than they had to. And they cut these ridge tops. They didn't climb to the top. They cut around them and hit the saddle on the other side. And when you start seeing those patterns, and then you go and look at a topo map in a timbered area or a somewhat timbered area, you can start to see, well, they're going to follow the same pathways. You just can't see it with your naked eye like you can in the open country, but you can on a map. And you can start putting those pieces together. We talked about
this in the previous episode. I think this is another point I want to make. This is where Gaia, and again, I'm not trying to sell, I'm just pointing out the differences. When you get into that subtle rolling country, okay, that hybrid topo map becomes almost useless. Because when they're on the contours or spread out, and you already don't have a lot of elevation gain, it's hard to pick that terrain out. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
That's where you need that really fine, detailed topo maps. When it's super, super steep, almost any topo map will work.
Right.
But when it becomes more subtle, that's when the 20-foot contours and the raw USGS 7.5 minute topo maps really shine.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. So there's another example of when you might jump over to Gaia real quick and do some topo analysis if you're an OnX guy, because you need that detail that OnX does not have.
Yeah.
And vice versa. I mean, if you're in super steep country, you might get away with just using OnX and, because it's fine for that.
Right.
So it's using the right tool for the job. We talk about that a lot. So one of the other things about benches, last thing I'll say, I don't want to give too many things away here, but when you find these things that we just talked about, and then you find chain benches, those are freaking money.
Yeah.
What I mean by chain is bench after bench after bench. Elk love stacked benches. When you find an area that has a bump out bench, and then it's got a little steep, and then a bump out bench, you've seen these places, and you find another bump out bench, and they're just stacked up the slope, money. The reason is they'll move between those benches during the day, during shooting hours.
Well, you'll have multiple bulls in each of those benches.
Special satellites can be on the one
satellites,
above.
right.
So these stacked benches also are prime wallow areas.
Yes.
Because what that usually means is when they're stacked benches on that
water gets stuck.
It's a low spot. Okay. A bench is not necessarily a low spot, but could be. Pay attention to that topo map.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize this. When you see the circle with the hashed lines, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
That's a depression. Okay. It's a subtle feature on a topo map. Can't see it on X that often. You got to use the USGS to see them. But when you see the depression with the hash marks on a bench, there's a good chance, not always. I always want to pay attention to those because there could be a wallow right there in the timber.
Yeah.
Because it's showing a depression that could hold moisture, could be attractive. So I like chain benches. I like lots of benches, but I really like those stacked or even vertical, Brian, for benches that are on the same elevation, that you've got a bump out bench here, you've got steep, and they can traverse to the next bench. So I like stacked better, but I'll take
I can remember
parallel benches.
I can remember getting out to this area. We backpacked in a long way, and it was a tough backpack trip because you had to go through a few miles of blowdowns. And so you were climbing log after log after log after log, waist high at times. It was just nobody's going to go there because it's hard enough to get back there, but it's another whole thing to pack an elk out of there. You know, when you add like 100-pound pack and you got to climb over logs and climb up on logs and jump off logs, it's a tedious thing. But there was just so many elk back there once you got through the burns, the old burns. There's no other way back there. And so we would get back there and then we would settle up and we would be down low in those meadows, and you'd have this burn on a slope, a relatively newish burn. And in that burn, you had like 9 benches that were stacked, just all up. And you would have a herd bull on this bench, herd bull on that bench, the satellite here, satellite there. And as soon as as soon as the sun sort of ebbed a little bit and it got a little shaded because it was hot, they would all stand up, and all those every elk would just the whole mountainside of benches. On every bench, there were just elk screaming back and forth at each other. And I'm like, it's like clockwork. You'll find them on those spots year over year over year.
That's what I was getting ready to say. Benches are one of the elk finding features that is become habitual for elk. I don't know what it is, but they'll find certain benches, and they, even with pressure, they will come back to those benches. Mm-hmm. Now, they might move off if they get pressured off, but they're coming back. There's something about them that they're comfortable there. They like them. They get the affinity for them. Mm-hmm. And these bulls will, you'll find old rubs. You'll find on a lot of these benches, you'll find a rub that is super old. The tree's dead. And then you'll find right next to it brand new spruce that's just been shredded. When you find that scenario on a bench, what that's telling you is that this is a legacy bench. I call them legacy benches. These are benches that they just want to be at. There's elk just have places, and it's hard to, we can put all these features together, but in the reality, elk, you always hear it all the time. They just want to be where they want to be. Yeah. And benches is one of those. Yeah. Like there's certain ones that I can't really tell you why. Yeah. But they love them. Mm-hmm. And if you can find them, and they're surrounded by a few of these other features. Now, I'm probably not going to go back to them because that's just not my style. But a lot of guys, that's a good spot. Yeah. It's one of those spots that you can, year after year, find elk on. Even when you kill an elk off of them. So when another elk will move in.
So totally. Yeah. So when you put these hunt plans together, and you're looking for all of these features, you're looking for as many as possible, all kind of in the same spot.
Kind of.
As much as possible.
It's an odds multiplier.
As well as getting, you're also paying attention to the zones of pressure.
That's right.
And you're looking for all of these sort of things outside those zones of pressure.
Right.
Or within them where the elk are going to get pushed to that spot. Because
in Oregon, for example, it's hard to get those places that meet the zones of pressure. I understand that. But in those areas, you're looking for the edges. Where are those overlapping circles? Mm-hmm. Where's that 2 mile circle touch the other 2 mile circle? Well, that spot right there is the furthest spot.
Well, like right now, we're publishing our videos on mule deer. Yeah. A mule deer hunt this year. And people are saying, how'd you get such old mature deer in like public land and, Ryan's Ball has trash all over it and stuff. And it's like, well, the reality is we don't go that far from. Sometimes we do.
You guys go.
Sometimes we do, but what I'm getting at is you don't have to go that far in a lot of areas. It's so surprising, and this is especially true for rifle. Okay, the great majority of rifle hunters don't go very far from the road. Don't. So they're just hunting roads, and so you decide to be the guy that goes a little ways in. Boom, you have so much country to yourself. But it depends.
It's not only that, too, Brian, I want to add, is going where you can't see from the road.
Yeah. Yeah, money.
You know what I'm saying? That's a subtle statement, but it's important because big country that's not that steep, you can see a lot from the road. Yeah. But if you can find the place that you can't see from the road.
That's 100%. We have some great mule deer spots that we like that. I'm like, Ryan, because Ryan took me to a couple. And one of the first questions I asked was, how did you know about this spot? From a map.
Can't see it from
a map. 100% from a map, because there's no way. You can't see it from anywhere. Yeah. There's no roads back there, but trails and hills and slopes. It's a little slice of heaven stuck in a spot that you wouldn't know about unless you used a map. Aerial photos and you're not going to find it because you have to traverse a slot canyon for 4 miles that looks like it's leading to nothing valuable. Yeah. Well, who's going to do that? And then if you climb on the tops, you can't see where that thing goes. And so I think that's where if you're looking at a map and you can find a spot where you're like, nobody's going to know about that unless they also looked at a map. And a lot of them don't. They just get there. They wander around. They figure stuff out on their hunt, and they go home never knowing the gems that are right there had they just looked at it.
Because I'm telling you, Brian, those places like what you just described are incredibly hard to pick out. On your phone, bouncing down the road, right, on a 4-inch screen, looking at a pure raw topographic view with no 3D tilt.
Especially when you're kind of myopically looking at the areas you're in, but if this is a 5 mile to
That's
the
what I'm saying.
side,
it's hard to do. Because remember what we were talking about yesterday, as you zoom in, you get more detail, but you can't see no area. But as you zoom out, in most of these platforms, you lose the detail. They can't show you. It just is the way it works. The more you zoom out, they can't show you all the detail. It's not possible.
Right.
So to make these applications usable, they have to summarize the data.
Yeah.
Right?
Which is useful.
Yeah, to make it where you can navigate it. Because otherwise, it'd be all brown.
Yeah.
Because if you crunched all the contour lines on a zoom out, you wouldn't be able to see anything.
Right.
So they have to summarize it, so to speak. And OnX is one of the best at that.
Yeah.
But it's also one of the worst for details. When you zoom out, there's no detail.
Yeah.
Because they make it pleasant to look at. But you lose that fine-tuning ability.
Yeah, that's where we were using Gaia, and I was like, whoa, these two together?
That's the key. Use them in tandem, not exclusive.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing so I would say that I use OnX. I don't know if you ever get into this, but I use OnX on stocks. Me and Ryan both heavily on stocks because, let's say you have a buck bedded on that slope and you got your bow and arrow in hand and you figure out your route. We're using Gaia. This is a bear season, especially. We're using Gaia and OnX to figure out entry points.
Yeah.
We got to this one spot where Ryan was trying to kill that bear red lightning, and he gave us a slip. Well, the wind was blowing such that we didn't want to drop down, and we'd get busted, okay? And we were at the point where he was at the base of a sheer cliff face, and we were trying to figure out, well, is there a route to get above him so we can keep the wind because it's blowing up? Can we get above him and go around this sheer cliff face? And the sun is going down. Is there anything to pick your way through? And there was nothing through OnX that we could really find. But, you get on Gaia and you could see these,
Small,
there's a little
subtle changes.
And sure enough, we got on there and deer trails were right there. And it was literally just like one tiny, skinny trail that allowed you to safely just cruise to the top, go around, and come back down. How would you find that? How would you get around? And then we got around, and then Red Lightning was there the whole time, but we thought he left, and we accidentally called him in and didn't know he was there when we did that squeal, that wounded critter call to stop a different bear, and I didn't know that he was there until we got home, and then looked at the footage, but still the plan worked, and we used the topo to figure that out. Yep. And without having multiple tools, we probably would have backed up, and missed on that.
Well, it's interesting you say that because one of the last things I'll say about the benches and stuff is slopes. You were analyzing the topographic layer, but really what you were analyzing is where was there an acceptable slope that we could squeeze through, right? So I spend personally a lot of my e-scouting time on analyzing slope. So you can't do it with a lot of tools. You can't do it with OnX. You can't do it really with GOHUNT. It's not available yet. But you can do it with Gaia. They have a slope layer. It's a Cal Topo layer that you can turn on, and it will color. We talked about this previously. It will colorize the slope angles. You guys are going to love that for bear hunting. I don't know if you're using that layer yet.
I could see that being really useful for llamas.
For me to navigate my llama where I know I can hike in.
Yeah.
So if I'm trying to plan my route in, I always got the slope layer turned on.
Because we went into the eagle caps with my pack goats. And pack goats are awesome. And they
don't care about the slope.
They can do some amazing stuff in those rocks.
And llamas are pretty much like that too. But you want to go the best route.
Yeah. But there was still some spots when you put a 30-pound pack on a little goat, and then you want them to climb a cliff. Rock slides
and shale slides.
And I'm like, and we had some spots where those goats, they made it, but it was cruel what we did to them. It's like we shouldn't have been trying to go there. Well, having a map ahead of time would have been great.
So one thing you want to, last tip on this. So I use CalTopo a lot. But I'm using it less and less because I found
What is it?
It's called cowtopo.com.
Cal?
Cal,
C-O-
C-A-L.
Okay.
C-A-L-T-O-P-O, for those that don't use it.
Uh-huh.
It's an incredible platform for slope analysis. But now there is a way to, and of course I go through this, you can export the slope layer out of CalTopo and put it into Google Earth. It's freaking money. It's money. Because I like Google Earth for a lot of things.
Right.
But I want slope analysis in there.
You can import that.
You can export it out of CalTopo as a KMZ file. Well, it's actually, you have to kind of print it. It's kind of a process. You take it out of CalTopo for the area that you want. Boom, pop it right into Google Earth, and then you can turn it on and off. And with Google Earth, I think a lot of people know this, but a lot of people don't. You can adjust the opacity of layers in Google Earth. Every layer, okay? So you export and you bring in this CalTopo slope layer, and then you turn down the opacity.
Yep.
So now you can see the aerial photo with the color on top.
But for people who don't know, the opacity is just
Transparency.
Transparency.
Right. So you can start playing with it, and we go through a lot of this. You can start playing with the transparency layers with that. So that's a great thing to remember.
Yeah.
CalTopo, you can check it out. But here's the thing you got to keep in mind about slopes. And I've made a lot of mistakes in the course, guys, and I apologize. I misspeak about this all the time. When I say percent and degrees,
Yeah.
people get confused. They're not the same. So they're not 50%, but close. Okay. So when you're talking about elk like to live in 20 to 40% slopes, they love that. Okay. That's 11 to 20 degrees.
Gotcha.
So, but you'll hear guys say, oh, I love to hunt on 40-degree slopes. No, they don't.
No, you don't. Right.
They want to hunt on 40% slopes.
Right.
So
It's almost a 1-to-1 slope right there.
it's almost, yeah. So I know that sounds
It's
simple.
like a 12-12 pitch.
But I get excited when I'm talking sometimes about slopes, and I'll say a percent when I meant to say degree.
Yeah.
So just keep that in mind.
Yeah.
So, for example, when you're looking at Google Earth and you're doing slope analysis, which I go through some tools where you can look at. It's a really great tool in Google Earth. You can look at the slope degrees of all your established routes. Google Earth shows in percent. Okay. Got to remember that. Because when you can start looking at CalTopo and stuff, it's in degrees. So you got to be able to kind of understand the two. So I wanted to point that out real quick, is that slope is not percent and percent is not, degree is not percent is not degree.
Yeah. I'll tell you, some of these places we go and we hunt, we really do leverage these maps. Like we're glassing, and you're in this country that's just, you can't walk through it. You have to find pathways through it, and we'll see an animal that we want to get. And half of the what we love is the fact that we see it over there, and we're like, most guys would be like, yeah, you can't, there's no way. And we're like, no, 3 days from now, we could be standing there. We literally do that.
Work out your route.
And we figure it out. And some of those places, I'm like where we killed that chocolate thunder bear, a few years back. I was like, that was so cool because we found a way to get there. And we were looking at it going, hardly anybody. Who's been there in this spot? First of all, to even see that it was there, you'd have to be like 2 days hiking on this side of the world to see that side of the world. Otherwise, you wouldn't even know it was there.
Yeah.
And then it was like, okay, so how do you get there? And then finding a way in, which was treacherous. Ryan has wobbly legs a little bit. He's tall and he gets a little wobbly on some of those cliff sides. I'll just tell you,
I love throwing him under the bus.
I'm telling you, I'm way more agile than Ryan Lampers. He can climb higher and faster, but I'm a ballerina. So, but some of those spots were a little sketchy. But we got in there and we used these tools to do it.
Well, you use fine, detailed topographic maps. I hear you keep saying it over and over again.
And I should say, when I say we, I mean, Ryan.
Ryan introduced you to it,
Right.
Right, and I introduced Ryan to it.
Yeah, I'm learning all the time, but Ryan is the majority planner.
You know, and he's not an IT guy either, at all.
No,
but there's some things like we were talking about this last night at dinner. He's good at hunting.
He's good at mapping.
He's good at killing, and he's good at hunting.
Yeah,
but he's also good at in the field working it out on the map.
No, it's powerful.
Really good at that. And that's really what it comes down to is, this e-scouting stuff that we're talking about, Ryan, is really setting you up to be better in the field using your platforms and your tools.
Well, I often hunt, without Ryan. Like this year, I hunted elk quite a while without Ryan. And when there's an advantage, it's very easy to lean on someone like Ryan if you're not careful, right? Yeah. That's why I like to go on my own hunts and solo and kill elk by myself, because when you see an animal that's bedded and stockable, and you put a plan together, it's a whole different ball game. Like from where you're at, and then you get over to where the animal is, and you're within 100 yards, and you're like, "Where the hell am I? Where's the animal? It doesn't look the same on this side as it did over there." And Ryan has an uncanny ability to see a spot miles away, and then when he's standing in the spot, know it's the spot.
Or what he's good at is dropping the pin in the right spot.
Well, I'm good at that. I have to be
looking over there and being able to place that pin. You know what I'm talking about? Like you see an animal and you want to mark it on your phone so that when you get over there, you've got a reference to work off of, not just what you saw.
And I'm better than I've ever been in my life. This year.
But that's a skill. I mean, you really got to understand topography maps and how to look at that. See those drainages, judge elevations, make some determinations, and be able to drop that pin. Yeah. And that's, again, I know we just said it, but the more time you spend e-scouting and studying maps and learning contours and working with slope angles, and the more you do it, the better you're going to be in the field applying it. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the critical part for me is we use the topos and the maps, when Ryan's trashy buck, and we got it on film just briefly. And from a distance from the side, he looked okay. But I was filming and I zoomed it in as far as I could. And just for 1 second, he turned his head and I saw him from the back. And it was just like trash sticking out. From the side, couldn't see any of that trash. It was just all looks like a 4-point.
Yeah.
And he didn't look that big. And then you saw it and you're like, wait a minute. Because I cropped in close and then I showed it to Ryan. I'm like, you got to look at this. This is not. He's tricking. Something's going on. Yeah. And he's like, oh, we got to find out. We got to get closer to this thing. We need more intel.
we need more information.
And so we bombed over there to go look for this buck. We get over there and we had got on this hill and Ryan was watching this thing. We stayed there for a half hour and I was like, or longer, I can't remember. And I was like, are we going to go check out the drainage where that buck was? And Ryan was kind of like, aren't we in that drainage? I'm like, and this is one of the rare times where Ryan kind of gets a little, got turned around a little bit. That's usually me all the time. And turns out that buck was another drainage over. And I'm like, no, look at the video. Like I filmed him walk into that cut with that tree right there. Yeah. And we looked at that and then we looked at the feature and it was like, oh, that's where he's at. And then he put his glass in that direction instead. Well, all that stuff just when we saw the buck and we get on the map and then we put the waypoint in and so this is what Ryan does. A lot of times he's glassing an area. And while he's glassing that area, he's like, well, what if I see a bear here or a deer here or here or here or here, especially with bear because they move so much, or elk. And he'll already have 3 or 4.
He's already working the
routes before we see something. So we only have 40 minutes before dark, and we have a giant bear that we're going to go after. Most guys would be like, we're going to have to look for him in the morning.
Yeah.
But we don't have to because Ryan already knows where the river crossing is, where the swamp is, and then, where the route is with the wind in the right direction. There's already multiple routes in case you see one here, or here. And that forethought and that thinking ahead is strong, and it's the using the maps constantly scouring and using the map. And I'll go hunting with guys who never bring their map out, or when they go on a stock, they haven't routed it I'm very much into putting a waypoint. This is if I get to this spot and you draw a line, you're like, I'll be 100 yards from
That's
here.
right. Shot distances.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I'm figuring all this out. I'm like, dun, 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 dun. Well, you're like, can I shoot across the canyon if I got to this spot? Because that would be ideal because they're not even on the same side. He can't win me. And it's like, oh, that'd be a 250-yard
Do a quick
cross. It's like, oh, that's where we need to go. Because there's no way, once you're committed to that, it's going to get dark. And if it's too far to shoot,
why go there?
Yeah. And so all those things I think we actively use it on X, especially for those
measurements.
Yeah. And
so
the aerial photos are critical because when you're looking at a slope and there's only like one giant evergreen on that slope and the buck is bedded right under it, it's like you can map it. When you're looking at the topo,
you can get close, but you can't.
I'm not sure, exactly. And when you're off 50 yards with a bow, that's a big deal, and so having the topo and going, okay, and we're often arguing about which tree. No, like this, we're like, well, I swear to you, it's this one. No, it's got to be this one.
Oh, when you're looking at it on the screen?
Yeah. And it's like, and you're like, those are like this year with the elk in the basin, where me and Brad were doing a stalk. And I'm like, no, because he's right by that rock, and you start looking at, he's by this cut, or there's a bench. He's kind of on a bench. And you start to go, oh yeah, those trees look the same, but actually you're finding other features near the tree. And just getting better at reading those maps. Well, you don't have to do that when you're whitetail hunting in Kansas.
Exactly. And so
it's a skill.
You just brought up a great point. We do talk about this some in the course, but maybe I need to spend more time on this. So, for example, what you're just talking about, using these platforms in the field, this is another tip for this in this Finding Elk series here. So pay close attention to this one.
Yeah.
And on X, and again, this ain't a bash session. This is just reality. This is the way it is. You got 3 options when you download your offline maps to use them in the field.
Right.
You can do a 150-mile view.
10 or 5.
So I'm just going to tell you right now, if you're a spot and stalk guy, the 150 ain't going to cut it.
Yeah.
There's not enough detail to pick out those rocks and trees, right?
Right.
Even that 10-mile view is a little close to unusable for spot and stalking.
Yeah.
But the 5-mile view is going to take you 2 days to download all the tiles that you need for a big basin. Mm-hmm. Not really. It's, you know what I mean? Because it's smaller area.
It's painful.
So yeah. So okay, that is a feature, but also a limitation of OnX. They've got 3 options. That's it. Mm-hmm. Same with view. We talked about this.
Yeah.
They've got hybrid, satellite, topo. That's it. Gaia has, I think, 17 different resolution levels you can download when you do the offline. So if you really want to fine tune, you can do, I download in that 15 to 17 range, but you can, it's a slider.
Yeah.
You can set it anywhere you want and test the detail. So when it comes to offline map at high detail, I like Gaia for aerial photo downloads for that reason. But for other, in Kansas, maybe it's not as important.
Yeah.
So I may not need
It's a skill though, because
but learning,
for coos deer in the mountains in where we're at in southern Arizona, Mexico, they're tiny. They're tiny little deer that disappear. They're ghosts. And so when you have visibility on when it's bed, it's probably going to be there and you're going to stalk it. You have to like really pinpoint its location on the map with. So
you need high resolution.
And then you can like actually go, okay, he's 70 yards from me right now. I can't see him, but he's got to be behind that bush.
Yeah.
And when I'm a mile away glassing him, and then I'm able to put a point on exactly where he's at or close to it,
you're increasing your odds
dramatically. It's a game changer.
Yeah.
It really is. Because half the time, if last year I remember helping Anthony get into a spot, and I remember him calling me on the phone. He's like, right there. He's like, where is it? Because I'm glassing. I'm like, right in front of you, man. He's like, I can't see him. I'm like, well, he's there. I'm sorry. Like, Well,
see, you just said something right there. So the fact that you can actually make a phone call.
Yeah, that's rare. That's in Arizona, and it's legal.
Yeah, but
there's certain states it's not.
That's right. But it's important to remember that if you have cell service, okay,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get good, decent resolution.
Yeah, right.
But if you're relying on offline map downloads,
which is 90% of my other hunts.
All right, I know we're going to get down the rabbit hole here, but there's a layer in Gaia.
Yeah.
Oh, it's awesome. For every cell carrier, shows you the coverage.
Really?
So you can look at your hunt area, turn on the Verizon cell phone layer in Gaia.
No way.
And see if you're going to have cell or not. And it is remarkably accurate.
So that way you can just download the maps in the areas where there's no service.
Well, you still want to download them.
Yeah.
But you got a reasonably good chance. You're like, I'm probably going to be able to get high resolution. I'm still going to download them.
Yeah.
Well,
I always do the 150.
And
then
for
some.
the big wide, yeah.
Yeah, and
But
then I
how
go
cool
in
is that,
and I
though?
get detailed, like, I think this basin or that cut or this
You
spot.
can
is
say,
gonna be-
like this spot I bear hunt in Idaho. We were talking about this yesterday. There's no freaking cell. But I was looking the other day on it, and I was looking, oh, look at this ridge. This ridge has cell coverage because it's high enough.
Yeah.
If I could get my camp into that area, I'd be able to download new maps and stuff from there. So just a subtle little tool.
Right.
But again, it's not available in the other hunt platforms. Not available any other platform except I just
Interesting.
stumbled on it. And I think it's a relatively new feature. And I haven't seen it before until this year.
That's interesting.
And I'm like, I have Verizon.
That's pretty fancy.
And I'm linking Verizon cell phone coverage on my Gaia map is like, oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it doesn't change the fact that I'm still going to download my maps, but it does help you, plan a little better. Just
Right.
another tool. Anyway, another tip. All
Dude,
right.
This was not 20 minutes,
I know.
but it was really cool.
Hopefully people still like it. I know we're getting off track here. We get too excited when we get into this.
Oh, yeah, yeah. No, this is great. So, folks, I hope you got some info out of that. Check out treelineacademy.net and use the code GRITTY, and you'll get a discount on your course. And I think it's worth every penny. All we're hearing is really positive feedback on this thing, and you're selling the hell out of it, which is also an indicator of its value. Like if when things suck, word gets out.
Well,
and when
really
things are awesome, word gets out.
The test was, Brian, to be totally honest with you, I was getting a lot of great feedback when people were taking the course, and that's great. But the real test was after the season was over.
Yeah.
Now that I'm starting to get all the stories in, like, I couldn't have killed this elk without this course. I gave up. I had to switch to my hunt plan number 3. And when I got there, the elk were there.
Yeah.
It's just so rewarding to get these testimonies now after the season.
Right.
Because, when you put something like this together and you spend a year and a half doing it, you're like, is it going to work for everybody? I know it works for me.
Right.
But is it going to work for other
Right.
people? And to see it, working for people has been really, really humbling.
I'm going into a legit spot this year that is all brand new for me for elk. And it's going to be interesting because it's going to be a whole different sort of logistics issue. Ryan and I are often combining e-bikes or boats and rafts and like anything that makes
Tools,
it harder and harder to get to. And this is going to be a really cool kind of place for me to go and try to get it done.
But you're going to have to spend some time.
I'm going to have to spend some time because if you kill an elk over here, you can float it out. If you kill it over here, you got to pack it to here, and then you could get a four-wheeler to that spot and save a 20-mile hike, or you could get access or permission through this property here, and you could have a 1-mile pack out, or there's all these things, right? And all this planning goes into it.
It's better to be done ahead of time than after the elk's on the
ground. Oh, yeah. And you could just kind of wander around and figure it out. But I want multiple areas. I want to go, okay, if they're all over here in this spot and it's outside my unit and I can't get them there, where's my other area that I can get them? And where's the freaking water, and where am I going to camp? All that stuff. Knowing all of that ahead of time. And I feel like water is in some of these early elk places that are open country.
Yeah.
One of the things that really sets you apart is there's areas like in Montana was the same, where you got to have it helps to have a pack animal who can pack in 40 gallons of water to last you a week.
Yeah.
Because no one else is going to be at that elevation or in that backcountry with you because hunting those elk, because they would have to drop 2,000 feet every day to get water and climb 2,000 feet every day. And it's just not feasible.
Yeah.
Or they'd have to spend days and days packing water in.
Pre-packing it in, yeah.
But if you can find areas where there's just a seep, we found a spot nobody goes to because there's no water. Nobody goes. There's no water. And those elk, they don't care if they go all the way down the mountain to water and all the way back.
Yeah.
But a dude with a backpack, it's a different thing. And so guys will show up for one day.
That's right. That's
and then they leave.
Right. They get in their head they can do it, but then the reality hits. The reality and the limitation
Right.
hits.
Or they certainly burn so much in that one hoorah that they got to go home now for 3 or 4 days or go do something by the road or whatever. It's a heroic feat to get there and hunt all day and then get out on the same day. But we were able to know that there's no water there. So we know elk are going to be there. They want to be there. There's all these other features there. But no hunters are going to be there, or very few.
Yeah.
The only hunters we ran into were couple dudes with llamas who packed in water. So
I love hunting
there's a
places.
llama craze. And so, but what we did find was the tiniest little wet spot. It's just a little green up wet. And then we kicked a hole in there and we shoved a pipe in it and then sealed it up, put rocks all around it. And within a few minutes, it's flowing a drip of water out. And it's enough that we could get basically clean water out of the ground that you wouldn't think you could get out of the ground.
Yeah.
And we're just filling up our water bottles every day. We didn't have to pack any water in.
Yeah.
And what was great is it was like 12 miles in. So on foot. So then we get there with like 5 empty bladders. And then, we had to spend like hours like filling bladders, but we didn't have to carry it.
Yeah, that's right.
And
you can stay.
And then we just stayed. And then every few days we had to go fill like, I don't know, like 15 liters of water. And then, but it was powerful.
Yeah.
That put us in some major, of course, we took our pipe every day and stashed it somewhere every time. We don't want anybody else to find our water secret because it'll change it.
Yeah.
Another dude finds that spot or knows that there's water there and
not over,
he's there too.
He's there
like
now.
Other people are there. Finding little things like that keep people out of areas is just pretty cool.
Yeah, that's right. Good tip.
All right, folks. Hope you got something out of that. Like I said, check out treelineacademy.net. Use the code GRITTY. Thanks for tuning in. And the next show we're going to do is next week. We're going to talk about what are we going to talk about?
Canyons, creeks, and drainages.
Canyons, creeks, and drainages. Sweet. Thanks, folks. Stay gritty.